Okay, so hello everyone, good morning or good afternoon. We're pleased to be here today with Matt Navarra, a renowned expert in social media and digital marketing. It's basically our fourth time we're having a virtual lecture, and we're really happy that Matt was willing to accept our invitation. So maybe just like briefly about Matt, with over 20 years of experience in the industry, Matt has worked with some of the world's biggest brands. His previous clients include BBC, ITV, ITN, United Nations, International Red Cross, US Food and Drug Administration, Mozilla, Monzo, and Pinterest. And earlier in his career, what's probably like most interesting to many of you here, that Matt was director of social media at the Next Web and digital communications advisor for the UK government. Matt founded Geek Out, an ever-expanding community and suite of resources for social media professionals. So go and check that out. Matt is, as a leading social media expert, frequently invited to comment on BBC News, Sky News, NBC Europe, CNN, and other channels. And with that role, he also appeared in several high-profile documentaries, including that was versus Heard, that's interesting, Panorama, and Nicola Bully, The Whole Story. Of course, in today's rapidly evolving digital landscape, staying ahead of the curve is essential for businesses and governments alike. So Matt has been at the forefront of this ever-changing field, providing insights and guidance to many professionals around the world. But before we give the floor to Matt, I would like to give the floor actually to my counterpart, Matt Jacobs, who can tell you a little bit about our project within the scope. Actually, we're hosting these virtual lectures. So Matt, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Ingrid. Just to give you guys a bit of background on this web series, as Ingrid said, this is the fourth iteration of a web series that we have been implementing under the scope of the European Digital Diplomacy Exchange, which is a program organized by the U.S. Department of State and implemented by the Center for European Perspective. The nature of this network, the EDDE network, is to really build the digital strategic communications and counter disinformation capacities of partner governments, originally across Europe, but now across the world. And as part of this, we have organized a number of conferences, lectures, series that seek to kind of build digital capacities through the culmination of digital insights from industry-leading experts, whether they're found in government, the private sector, academia, think tanks, etc. And traditionally, this network had been closed only to members who can identify as government communicators, individuals of press, public affairs, and public diplomacy teams across the world. But recently, we have decided to open this up to everyone who may be interested in joining, who also might be interested in building their own digital strategic communications capacities, and thus our opportunity to bring these speakers to a broader public, including a number of our USG employed, locally employed staffers who I see are well represented among our audience today. So we're very pleased to be able to kick off this fourth iteration with Matt Navarra, who was actually suggested to us by one of our EDDE members, and are interested in hearing what he has to say. If you're interested in learning further more about the EDDE network and its efforts in the region or in this broader practice area, we'll be providing links to various information sources and social media sources below in the chat. All right, thank you, Ingrid, and over to you.
Okay, so this session is going to be a little bit like different from the other ones, because how we're going to do it, we're going to make an interview basically with Matt. So we prepared a couple of questions. And of course, if you are interested in learning more about Matt, you can post like some questions in chat. But yes, hopefully that I can start with this. So Matt, really happy to have you here with us today. Basically to have an opportunity to learn from your rich experience. So let me start with the first one. So life as a social media manager and a public sector organization presents, of course, unique challenges. And I guess we're sure that many of our participants here would agree with this statement. So my question is the following: what was your experience in navigating the complexities of government communications on social media? Are
Yeah,
there
it's a good question because it brought me back to kind of remembering the first roles that I had in social for government. So to give a quick back history of what my route was into it, I trained to become a marketer, really. I did a degree in business and economics, and I got a graduate job in London working for a decent bank. It was a good salary, it was a good job, but I just didn't really enjoy it. And I spent many years doing other jobs. I was a teacher for a while. I was a bank manager. I was a marketing manager. And then I was offered a role, or I applied for a role and got this role working for the UK Intellectual Property Office, which at the time was the part of the Department for Business Innovation and Science, I think, BIS. And the role was meant to be a press, PR, and comms manager. It was kind of more of a general press person in the press office. But that was around 2009, and social media was a thing. Twitter existed, Facebook was, taking off. But in terms of government use of social media at that point in time, it was fairly limited to some of the bigger departments, and there was a very risk averse, very avoidant of using it for fear of, causing all sorts of some sort of media storm for something they posted. It was they were very hesitant. But I got interested in using the social media because it was something I'd always been interested in leading into the job. And then I quite quickly managed to kind of corner the market in my department for being the guy that did the social media. It was the token sort of geek who knows something about computers. Oh, can you do the social media? That was the kind of way I fell into it. And at the time, there was a limited amount of cross-government digital sort of networks and support, but there wasn't a huge amount of it. And it wasn't until I got offered an opportunity to go and spend a secondment in London with at the time, the brand new UK government, what was it called at the time? Basically the new digital team. I forgot the name of it now, but that they put me in there, and I was given the job of looking after the main civil service Twitter account, as well as coming up with content for the blog for the civil service website. And then it was Cabinet Office Twitter account, and then it was, would you like to do a secondment in Downing Street with the Prime Minister's team? And I spent some time in there, and so that was kind of my entry route into the government space. But in terms of the complexities of it, I don't get a strong impression that things have changed massively in some areas, but in other areas it's dramatically changed. So things that I remember from my days, obviously lots of bureaucracy trying to get a decision made about doing something new or different or slightly risky. It was always very, very challenging, and always had to find a way to give the teams around us, or the senior leadership teams, confidence in allowing us to do it. So that was probably one of the biggest challenges to overcome, particularly because social media was very new at that point in time for government teams. I think the other thing that was very frustrating at the time, and I get a sense from speaking to people who work in Downing Street now and other places that this is still the same, is that the sanitization of messaging, kind of coming up with a really good idea, coming up with maybe it be a single tweet or a X post as it should be now, or something on Instagram or wherever it may be. But that, by the time it goes around the chain of command of legal or the teams that have responsibility and ownership of certain areas of the department, and then through the comms and press people, and it comes back and it's this sanitized kind of like press release in a social media post form thing. It's one step away from somebody giving you a PDF to stick up on Facebook. So I think that was always quite challenging, to try and get them to think differently, and also to be more agile and more reactive to things. The risk averse and limited budgets was also challenging. Like the budget wise, there was always a demand to kind of like, well, what how are you going to prove the value of this? What's it actually going to deliver in terms of our goals as an organization? And back in 2009, 10, 11, 12, kind of like trying to understand, well, what actually can we attribute by doing this, it's going to deliver X goal for the organization, because that, you know, social wasn't even part of the thinking when they set up the objectives of that particular government agency or department. So for me, that was particularly challenging to deal with. A few other things I think are worth mentioning, kind of like, and this is kind of an overriding theme that I probably would press upon people, is that you can never please every citizen. As we all know, you know, it doesn't matter what you do or what you say, there will be somebody that says you're doing something that, you know, is a waste of money, why are you bothering doing this? Or look at them trying to be young and hip and cool by being on this platform, or you know, look at them supporting this kind of view on such and such a political issue. And it can be quite draining and kind of quite, you know, demotivating to feel like you're satisfying nobody and everybody hates you and everything that you're doing is not appreciated, when actually the people that hate and shout loudest are the people that are, you know, don't like something, but the people that are actually quite happy and find the post useful and find the campaigns you do useful actually don't often filter through, and you don't get a sense of what you've done has been actually, you know, appreciated by people that you're kind of trying to get that message out to. And then finally, kind of like the challenge of sort of shifting government away from broadcasting, you know, being a broadcast channel and not a social channel. I still think that there's many government agencies and departments and institutions that treat social as a broadcast channel, and they have a social media strategy or social media guidelines, but they don't really have a specific engagement strategy. Like, okay, we get what your platforms you're going to be on and the formats you're going to use and why you're using social, and maybe the tone of voice and all of that stuff. But what about once the post's out there and once things, you know, things are published or other people have published things, what's your strategy for how you will engage, how frequently we do it, what tone of voice will you use, what is the goal from the engagement that you're trying to drive, and things. And so I think that was always quite frustrating, that many government departments I used to work with kind of just like, once it was fired out, that was kind of, the job was done almost, and it's on to the next thing. And I think thankfully it's far more sophisticated. So those were some of the challenges, I think, working in government for me anyway.
All right, thank you so much. But maybe like, how do you feel that like maybe now that you're basically advising like governments, do you feel that things changed a little bit like from back in days when you were still working as a civil servant? Are there like maybe any strategies now that you find maybe more effective
Yeah.
engaging with with audiences, like in more of in government institutions?
So nowadays, my work in terms of government is typically on a consultancy basis. So I have been back to Downing Street to deliver updates. I did in the summer of last year, went back and just did a debriefing of, this is the state of social right now, and these are the things that are coming around the corner that you might want to be thinking about using it for the Prime Minister or for the 10 Downing Street accounts. And so I do things like that. And I've done some consultancy for GCHQ, the UK spy agency, the equivalent to the NSA in the US, and a few other projects with US teams. So I still kind of have my hand in kind of that sort of work. And I also work with, you know, organizations like the United Nations and others as well. So in answer to your question, has it changed? Yes, thankfully it has. You know, I get, you know, it feels far more closer than it ever was to being acting and behaving internally like a private sector organization, and realizing that just because you're a public sector organization doesn't mean that you have to act and behave always like a public sector organization, and actually using some of the tools and tactics and strategies and content formats and ideas that you might see on a brand's account can be at times used in government as well. And I think that one of the big things, this is a good example of it, these sorts of forums and these cross-governmental kind of digital team setups are really, really helpful. Like when I left government, they had a few of them started, but it wasn't quite as organized. And I think one of the things that's hard when you work in a government role is keeping up with what else is going on outside in social beyond public sector, and knowing what other people in other teams are doing, and learning from them and sharing best practice, and also sharing some of the kind of struggles and challenges and things that have failed, so that you can help others that are doing it, doing similar things to not fail. So I think that those things have been improved, and I think that there's a much more contemporary, modern kind of way of engaging that some government institutions I've worked seem to be very good at, in terms of being much more, authentic and not so stuffy and conservative, and taking some risks. That there's equally still many institutions that unfortunately are like that. And think in terms of strategies and things, I think that one of some basic things is, don't always think that you need to be on every platform, and also you need to be on every new platform. Even brands with hundreds of millions of dollars to play with in budgets, don't necessarily have a presence on every single network. And just because Be Real has suddenly launched, or the Threads has come around, that it means that we have to be on there. We should be straight away. There is a case for kind of like, you have got more restricted budgets. You've also got limited resource generally compared to the private sector in most cases, and it's far better to focus on platforms that you are tried and tested, but also you just align with what your goals and you're trying to achieve, and there should be a proportion of the time that you spend that's allocated to experimentation, and that may form part of it. So don't get sort of tempted into just jumping on everything and then giving yourself a huge amount of work to manage when you're already kind of struggling with the other things you've got to do. I think the other thing is to experiment as much as possible, to test as many different things as you can, as frequently as you can, and fail as many times as you possibly can, because that's the quickest way to figure out what is going to work and what's not going to work. It's also a great way of sort of growing the appetite internally in organizations by doing experiments that prove successes, or doing things piecemeal, bit by bit by bit. You can grow the confidence within the organization to be more open to doing more of those experimentations. And the more risk you take, or you're permitted to take, the bigger the potential gains are. If you continue to do the things that the organization has always done, or maybe tweak a little, make our captions a bit better and improve our video a little bit, all these things that are also important, those little tweaks are going to move the needle a small bit. It's only when you do the bigger swings, where you take something like that you've never done before, or you're like, this probably won't work, or this is a bit out there for us to do and it feels a bit uncomfortable. Those are the experiments with the biggest gains to be had, and I think the challenge in getting to do them is gaining support internally from the organization as well. I think that I mentioned also building a network of professionals. This stuff is really, really important, and finding ways outside of these meetings to have where people can quickly drop into a Slack channel and say, oh, this article is really useful, or have you seen what this organization is doing? This is really clever, or we tried this and it worked really well. This is how we did it. If you want any help, let us know. That kind of two-way dialogue, that's more than just when you have one-off meetings, that ongoing access to each other is really useful. I think it's important that I'm going to swear right now, but the biggest thing that somebody told me that really made the difference when I was in government in the UK was like, unless you just fucking do it, it won't get fucking done, because that's basically how government works. If you sit there hoping that someone will say yes to you to allow you to do something, or if you sit there and hope things will kind of gradually improve and maybe you'll make some tweaks and stuff, it will just, you won't get anywhere in government. You have to kind of be very proactive. You have to kind of sometimes, where you can, not say break the rules, but certainly do things where you kind of like, it feels a little bit risky, but it's a calculated risk, and it's something that you can justify doing. And you, rather than waiting around for someone else to kind of give you permission to do some stuff, if it's a small enough risk, just get on and do it. Because if you don't get on and do it in government, then things just don't get done, and that will untie you back. A couple other things, internal guidelines and policies, as much as they can be a drag to write and, often need updating, they can be quite useful to, give some structure and organization to social media teams in government. And also when you need to be reactive and be more agile and be able to do things that are, taking an opportunity that comes out of the blue that you can jump on and do something with, having some of that stuff already figured out on how you will respond and react when those times come around and you need to make decisions, and the guidelines will say what you can and can't do, can kind of be quite useful. And then finally, keep track of what others are doing in this space, private sector as well, but particularly, keep looking at go to loads of the government agencies that are similar to yours. Check out what the different US departments of natural resource, which are typically some of the best social media accounts out there, and see, dig around. There's plenty of blogs and sites that actually often do case studies on things that government social are doing, and because those will spark your own ideas, and you can steal those ideas, you can build on those ideas, and you can see how others have had success. So keeping your eyes open to that and finding a way to make sure you get that sort of information coming in. There's ways to do that. My newsletter is one way of doing it, but there are other sources that give you those sort of news updates. So I think those are some of the things to think about.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. I'm so glad that you said, just fucking do it or else it won't get fucking done. I want all of my team who is here, Anna, Kathleen. That's how I operate. Please feel empowered to take Matt's advice to heart on that one. And thank you for the shout out about the necessity of having networks and being able to collaborate and share information with one another, ideas with one another. That is one of the reasons that we founded our European Digital Diplomacy Exchange. It's one of the things that we offer, particularly when it comes to shared campaigns. So thank you for giving us a shout. And in return, I'm going to say Matt did mention his newsletter Geek Out. I am also going to put a plug in for Matt's newsletter Geek Out. It is something I've followed both on Matt's social accounts for quite a while, and I encourage everyone to check that out. But Matt, you raised a number of great points. And one thing I kind of want to speak to is that when we're talking about social media, oftentimes governments can forego or forget about the entire social part of the word social media, and really kind of like eschewing the personalization required of building a governmental brand or an identity for a principle, et cetera, and foregoing the kind of parasocial relationships that are so important to and attractive to people who want to engage with institutions and governments on social media. How do you feel that governments can better lean into this and engage in this component of social media and digital communication? And how can they better really define their personality within the constraints that you identified, in order for people to find them relatable, useful, attractive, engaging, et cetera?
Yeah, it is a challenging one, and I think it differs for every organization, because every government institution or department I've ever worked for they have a lot of similarities in terms of culture, but they also have different sort of levels of trust in their social media teams and autonomy given and granted to them. And some organizations and institutions are easier to create or formulate and devise a tone of voice that fits and can be used semi-universally across multiple platforms, whereas others it's very tricky. Some government institutions, the content that they put out is quite, it's not happy stuff all the time. It's stuff that can be quite harrowing. If you work in for the United Nations and organizations at Refugee Council and all of those sorts of things, it can be hard to kind of have a tone of voice that is upbeat and things. So that those are constant challenges. But I think that going back to the point about taking risks and being braver and stuff, like I think you have to push the boundaries a little bit with your own team and with your own bosses, but also with your own sort of fears of doing things. And you're not going to know until you try. I think that one of the things that was always said to me when I used to sort of be nervous about trying something new or doing something that might be kind of either kind of snapped back by people the citizens who follow us on social or by the media or whatever, is like, well, what's the worst that can happen for this particular thing? So say you were trying to do a new style of post and you're going to post on Threads, and rather than being kind of your formulaic, whatever your sort of general tone of voice is, you wanted to be a bit more playful and stuff, and you haven't done that before, and you're a bit nervous about doing it. There's lots of reasons why you might be nervous, and it would be reasonable to be a little bit hesitant. But well, what's the worst that can happen with that scenario? Like the worst that can happen is that people kind of come in the comments and say, "Oh, you're trying to be young, and look at this government agency trying to do this," or maybe some news journalist will think it's a fun story about what the government is doing on social media and stuff. But in 24 hours, 48 hours, most of these things are just going to disappear. And there's many a time when you try and do new things that if you think, well, what's the worst that can happen? And even if you spend half an hour thinking, well, okay, what are the possible worst case scenarios? And once you've identified them, you probably realize in many cases that they're not ones that need to be kind of holding you back. So I think that's something to bear in mind. I think that the tone of voice should be dependent on the platform you're on. I think, if you are an agency or department that has a presence on Threads, but you also have a presence on X, and you have something on TikTok, and you have something on Snapchat, all of those are very different platforms in some ways. They are similar in others, but they require a different tone of voice because they have a different main audience. The main audience of Snapchat is very young, as we know, and the main audience of X is very toxic most of the time, and is very very extreme one way or the other and stuff. And so I think that you certainly should have a flexibility in the way that you speak and use social and tone of voice. And I think it's almost more important in the engagement aspect of social as it is in the original post. Having an engagement strategy, and actually when you're engaging with people, that's sometimes the most valuable thing you can do, and also some of the most memorable things you can do that keep people coming back, and also shows that you're responsive. And that's a place where it's a little bit less visible because it's not the original post, but it's a really important space, a space to build community around your accounts. And that's an area where you can be, you should be exploring, trying to have a bit more personality. 10, 15 years ago, brands and government institutions would, let people think that these were faceless accounts with somebody, normally thought of the person behind the account. And it was kind of a bit of a funny thing when, say, like Wendy's would say something because it's a brand saying it. But now people they know it's a social media manager behind it. They know it's a digital comms person managing your stuff. And so trying to pretend you're this kind of faceless brand is pointless. You should kind of put in there, inject that you're a human being and talk like a human being, and talk in a way that people would expect to talk if it was somebody that was professional but friendly and warm and stuff. And if you're posting something that's a bit more fun and frivolous because it's not a serious government post, it's something about Valentine's Day, and you're just joining in with the fun of it to be part of the conversation and to show the lighter side of the institution, then the tone of voice should reflect that. But equally, there are times when there needs to be caution, because sometimes I remember someone saying to me, I said, well, why can't I post this tweet from the number 10 account? What would be and it wasn't anything sort of scandalous, but they said the problem with big government institutions and number 10 and all those sorts of accounts is that something you post today that is very innocuous and seems fun and light-hearted, if something in the world happened, like a plane crashed or some tragic incident happened, and there's something in that tweet that kind of is playful and stuff, and then you start to think, oh God, yeah, I suppose that could be a problem. But you shouldn't let that rule you to some degree. But I think there is a healthy level of kind of caution in certain accounts and certain types of content that you should have. I think in terms of tone of voice and being your reaction to engaging with other people, I think if you're looking for good examples of accounts, definitely look at I put a list down here of them, some of the we got here. So Washington State Department of Natural Resources, Oklahoma Wildlife Conservation, US Consumer Product Safety Commission, some really good examples of accounts that can have often serious messages or very dry kind of institutional messages, but have found a way to navigate that and actually be engaging. Because people, as much as they need government institutions to be informative and educational and official and legit and all of the things that you'd expect for a big important government department, they also want to be entertained a bit. If you're on TikTok, you're not going to get away with being just informational and informative all the time. You have to find a way to make things fun. And also with any piece of content or any post, what is the share value of this? What is the thing that's going to drive people to want to engage with this? What's going to entertain them? What's going to make it memorable and worthy of them wanting to share it elsewhere? So you do, that tone of voice and being human and taking some risks and expanding the way that you speak and being more just more normal, and it's so important. And one of the most annoying buzzwords we had last year was everybody saying be authentic, but it really is, particularly for government institutions, trying to be more human and a bit more authentically human, and not just some kind of droid that sits behind the screen because you're a government institution. It has to be professional all the time. I think that's ever so important, and you've seen the success of these accounts I mentioned as evidence of how much success you can have. So yeah, I think that's really important.
I think that's a really interesting point for those of us who work for the U.S. government who are listening right now. I mean, it is really interesting that what you would consider perhaps lower visibility government agencies and bureaus seem to be able to lean into that freedom of the kind of reduced pressure of visibility and ultimately engage in work that increases their visibility, increases their engagement.
And I would just say, as an
there's
example as
a lot for
well, I
us to
did a
learn.
piece of work with the US Food and Drug Administration, and just before COVID hit, or maybe it was during COVID, and it wasn't specifically to tackle their social for COVID necessarily, but actually it was more that they had a couple of accounts that were either used for kind of lobbying government and policy change, or being, representing what the government's views are on certain things, or providing important drug licensing information. They're really kind of dry, kind of fairly sort of uninteresting accounts to most people, but important to others. And I spoke to them about kind of like, why does it have to be serious? Some of this stuff is serious topics, and some of these things are fairly technical and things, but there's still avenues and opportunities here to be a bit more kind of relaxed and at times break loose a little bit, and actually make people kind of go, oh, I wasn't expecting that from the FDA. And interestingly, it's 6 to 8 months after I left, I noticed there was an article in Bloomberg saying how the FDA had started using memes, and I was like, oh, maybe they're getting in with it a bit more now. And so that there are, even in the institutions that have the hardest kind of messages to deliver sometimes, and the difficult audiences to reach, there are opportunities to become much more approachable and human. And I think you need to take those risks and do more of that sort of stuff.
Don't tell the State Department we're allowed to use memes. I can't imagine what's going to come out of that. But speaking of State Department, and I think now that we've hit almost halfway through the presentation, we have countless questions that we can continue asking you that we've prepared, but I want to kick this out to members of our audience who might have something to ask of you. So do any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask Matt? If so, just raise your little hand icon and we'll give the floor to you.
I feel that we have two questions actually in our chat already. Basically, one of them is more of a comment of Matthias, our dear friend. So, Matt, can you see them, or do you want to?
I agree you should not rush to be on all platforms. However, shouldn't organizations reserve their handles on the new platforms? Yeah, it can be prudent to, if you have a likelihood, you think there's a good enough chance that at some point you want to be on that platform, or you'll feel at risk of someone hijacking it, then it's fairly good practice, if you can, to secure the handle where possible. I don't think it's a big major concern. Apart from X, I would say most of the platforms are reasonably good at, if you kind of reach out to them to say, we're a government department, this is the handle, things, that they will work with you to sort of source that handle if needed. But yeah, it's not a bad idea, if you can, to secure the handles. Even if you could, don't put up an avatar or anything on there, you just leave it fairly blank, because obviously once you kind of populate it, people might get the impression that you're going to start posting, and you might not be ready for that. So just be aware of that.
Okay, and then we have another one that's interesting, and I'd love to weigh into this one after you discuss it, which is from Zoom user. So I don't know who this is, but it sounds like it's one of ours. For the US, do they really distinguish between digital diplomacy and public diplomacy? Every year, we only could find the report on public diplomacy activities rather than digital diplomacy. So, Matt, to summarize, how do you see the distinction between public diplomacy and digital diplomacy, if there even is a distinction between those two categories?
I was going to say it might be worth you kind of just expanding from what you're defining that as, because that sounds very much like a US kind of thing that you would split between. Like it's not terms I would come across in terms of how we would define it. So what specifically are you referencing there?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one because I've got a quick summary of it. And that is that I don't believe digital diplomacy is distinct from our public diplomacy, our public affairs, our press operations. It's not really digital press and digital public affairs and digital public diplomacy as a distinctive practiced area separate from traditional press, public diplomacy, and public affairs activities. But it is an avenue that considers that warrants different considerations. It is one that warrants different types of methodologies, different types of thoughts. It's an application of a practice, one that takes into account all the sociological and technological realities based upon the medium that we're using. But it is not distinct. When we are doing public diplomacy online using social media channels, that does not make it digital diplomacy separate from how we would do public diplomacy, say, in press, print, or media. So I don't really see a distinction between the practice areas themselves, but I do see it as requiring a different sort of characteristic, skills, capacities, competencies, and understandings to undertake effectively on that channel versus, say, those that we have traditionally relied upon.
I would agree. I think, yeah, ultimately these are tools, channels, tactics that can be employed for similar or different means. And maybe some years back then there might well have been a more valid distinction between the two. But given that a lot of what people consume in terms of what their governments are doing or what an institution has done and what people are thinking and feeling about certain issues and certain campaigns or engagement activities pretty much are for a large number of demographics anyway are based around social media or online in some format. It all kind of becomes part and parcel of the same effort. It's just a case of picking the different tools and tactics and channels for the right purposes. And like you were saying, the skill sets are somewhat different. Like I've worked in both a press office environment and PR kind of world, as well as working in digital social teams. And then even within digital social teams, I've worked in roles which have been more about content creation and kind of coming up with, campaigns and projects and things. Whereas I've also worked in community management and kind of just being in the trenches, delivering, kind of keeping engagement going and responding to inquiries. So I think it's very hard to sort of nowadays to split the two, but there's still value in recognizing there is a discipline difference there, maybe.
Yeah, as someone who served as a public diplomacy officer, a press officer, in tandem with and separate from my current position in digital, I couldn't agree more with you on that. So, I hope that answers your question, Zoom user. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Anyone willing to go on camera and ask a question or on audio?
Good.
Okay, Ingrid, I think it's up to us.
Shy. Oh my God.
I don't know. I'm emailing all my people. I'm taking note of who's here. You guys are gonna get
Austin,
followed up on.
Go, Austin.
I can talk for hours. You've got no problem, so it's all good. You're all good.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So Austin here with the Government of Canada. I work on international trade. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about measuring the impact of your social media. I think for trade, we can talk about Canada's free trade agreements. We can talk about the things that we're doing to increase opportunities for business. And we can look at our analytics and we can see what the reach is. But of course, that doesn't really measure necessarily the full extent of the impact. So yeah, I'm just curious if you could elaborate on how you measure the success of social media initiatives.
Yeah, and it's one of those questions with an app that has zillions of different answers on the basis of what depends on what sort of institution you are with and what the campaign's goals and objectives were, what sort of channels, what sort of activities you're doing, and many other things. But that aside, I think most social teams that work in government typically have the easiest way they can do any sort of sense of return of investment on what they've done, or any sort of measure is going to be using the basic analytic tools that some of the tools and platforms provide. And that, depending on what format the content is what you track. Those departments and agencies that have more sophisticated social listening tools, some of the tools out there are pretty good nowadays, and not just using kind of hard, crude sort of measures of average watch time or engagement measures or click-throughs or whatever else it might be for you, but also much more about the sentiment stuff. And I think one of the great things about the AI stuff that's going on is that these tools are going to get really powerful now, because not only are they going to be able to be much smarter at tracking and identifying themes in lots of comments and engagement that you might get, but also just general sentiment, but also making it easier to query some of this data and also kind of process lots more of it to give you a much richer insights into whatever it is you're specifically looking at. So I think that's a good development, but it's hard because not every government department has the kind of cost centers to be able to afford to use some of these tools. But I think the other thing is that, don't underestimate the value also, where possible, of kind of just surveying people. If you have people on an email list that kind of get information from your particular department or team for whatever reason, or if there's other ways that you have contact points online where you can get some more qualitative kind of outcomes in terms of people's sort of feelings about the organization or about particular issues, or any other kind of research that's a bit deeper than beyond what the social metrics are, that stuff can be harder and it's more time consuming and more expensive to get, but it can be really, really valuable. And if you've got other channels that kind of you're engaging with, that you can pop out a survey, and it doesn't have to always be slick, sexy, super. You can at times, depending on what sort of organization you are, use a simple form that you fill and create your own survey, get some basic information. I think that stuff can be really valuable. And also kind of getting, we've done stuff before. We've got people, found people who are quite frequent engagers on our channels, and people that seem to be quite vocal in good and bad ways, or negative ways, positive ways, and getting them on a call and having conversations, having small group focus groups, getting people together and asking them what their opinions are on certain things that the organization has done. So I think you have to move beyond just the analytics and the metrics that the platforms give you, and also be sure of kind of like, does it really tell you anything that you got more shares on that post than another post? Well, that's one indicator, but it's not the only indicator. And increasingly, one of the things I've noted here that we're going to maybe talk about is like one of the biggest shifts in social media that's going on is the move to private social. There was a piece in the Wall Street Journal recently saying that people aren't using social media as much. They're not posting it as much anymore. And Adam Mosseri, head of Instagram, rightly came back and said it's not that people aren't posting as much or using social media as much. They're just using it differently, and they're spending time in different places. And you get, the example being that, rather than people now posting to their feed on Instagram, all of the growth and all of the kind of expansion of Instagram as a platform has been seen in the last year to 2 years in DMs and group chats and channels and notes, all of these private spaces where people are doing things, sharing things, engaging in stuff that they would have been doing before on the feed or in a more public space, but they're using ephemeral tools and features or private groups, chats, and communities. And so that provides loads of opportunity, but also gives additional problems in terms of dark social and tracking, and thinking about what is it we create that would be carried into these spaces, and how do we become part of these spaces, or how do we create our own kind of private social spaces, whether it's an Instagram channel or a WhatsApp group or whatever it might be. So yeah, that's some of the thoughts. I don't know if that was useful to you at all.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank Thank you. I want to introduce Camila, who is one of our EDDE members who actually directly requested that we reach out to you and
Oh, I
get you
like
for
her.
one of
She
these
sounds great.
chats. Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah, she's got her hand raised. So Camila, it's all you.
Everyone, I'm not going to go on camera if you don't mind, but I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
It's a bit muffled, but I'll try.
Okay, I'm going to try to speak a bit louder. I have a particular question about the new social network threads. I've been, as a communicator, I've been following it recently, but I'm not sure how it is in the other countries, but in Lithuania, it doesn't seem to be communicating about the serious stuff. It's more like Instagram. I would say, do you think that the threads would replace Twitter? First question, and the second one, do you suggest government communicators like the government official accounts to go on the thread as well?
I might need someone who heard the question to tell me, repeat it back. So I couldn't quite get some of the words, but I'm happy to answer it, but I just couldn't quite catch it. So
I can help you out with that one.
yeah.
I speak fluent Camila, as does Ingrid. But Camila was asking primarily, it sounded about threads. And is there a chance that threads will replace Twitter? And if so, should governments be jumping on threads? And I think if anyone is suited to answer this question, it might be you, Matt.
Well, yeah. So for those that don't know, Twitter was where I made my home. I had the biggest audience, personal account audience of like 175,000 followers on it when I decided it was enough was enough, and I left the platform in latter part of last year and moved to Threads, and so Threads is not a direct replacement for Twitter. I think most people who have switched from X to Threads isn't because Threads is better. It's just not X, and that's good enough. If it's not X and it's similar, that's perfectly good enough for me. I think that in terms of like the whole, is it going to replace Twitter? Is Twitter going to sort of fall away and then Threads become the dominant one? I think that they will coexist. I think they will probably go on for some time, certainly in the short to medium term for Elon Musk's X, where X will exist on the scale it is now, with maybe some variations upwards or downwards in numbers and engagement. But the difference with X will be is what we're already seeing, is that the mix of users, the types of users that are on the platform will be, there'll be a lot of people that are power users and creators that are on there, and accounts that were, I think, very meaningful and useful to people will kind of shift elsewhere, maybe Threads. And then that vacuum will be filled by people that are very much from the extreme left or extreme right, and will be kind of empowered and emboldened by the policy changes that Elon Musk has put in place, and it's becoming very much like like Rumble and kind of like all of these other kind of alt platforms for things, and that isn't a great space for the mainstream audiences, and nor is it for brands, which is why they're vetoing using it. And when he's telling people to kind of go fuck yourself, it's not really helping his cause very much. And I think that that drama and chaos the next is only going to continue. And I've encouraged several agencies and government departments to kind of, that it's hard to kind of extract yourself from it, because it is such a unique and it's a very powerful platform, because the dynamic of how the platform works, and I'd be hesitant to say pull the plug completely, but I think that the risks for me seem to increase month on month, and at some point it might be that more government agencies and brands will make the call to exit. In terms of Threads, I think that Threads has got the best chance. Clearly, I think that for most people to see that, not just me. I think that the alternatives really are Blue Sky, Mastodon, Spill has been, and there's a few others. But in terms of scale, reaching a similar number of people or closer to the similar number of people as you would do on X, then Threads is your closest bet. You're going to get to that. I don't see Mastodon or Blue Sky reaching those scales. And Mastodon's got a couple of million, isn't it? And I think Blue Sky's got 4, 5, 6 million now after it's opened up publicly. I think Blue Sky is probably the closest similar thing to Twitter, if you want that experience, but it's a very much smaller scale. And then finally, to answer your question around kind of like, should government agencies and departments get on there. I think if you've got, I always tell organizations to kind of like, if you can't think of a good way to split up your content mix, 80-20 is as good as anything else. 80% of your stuff should be tried and tested, business as usual, things you have to do. And then the 20% of what you're doing, your time you're allocating, and the kind of content you're putting out should be really experimental. And the more experimental and the more kind of different, the better. And so within that bucket of things you're doing to try new stuff, Threads might be one of those things. And I guess you have to ask yourself as an organization that if it is popular and it does work out, can you resource that ongoing? Would you want to be able to do that? And also kind of what's your objective for being on there? And I think that's Threads' biggest problem, is kind of people are not really sure what it is and how and why they use it. It's not really directly like Twitter, but it's a bit like Twitter, and it's not like Instagram, but it feels, because it's made by Instagram, like an Instagram product, and it's got a Frankenstein audience of X users of left X and Instagram people, and then another bunch of people. So the audience is a bit muddled. And I think that identity crisis and finding what's the purpose. And I think if you look at brand accounts, some of my favorites are like Channel 4 in the UK is particularly good, and the usual suspects like Wendy's and 7-Eleven, and there's a few other big brands that they're really just chucking as much as they can at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I think even now we're still in that experimental phase. So I think it's definitely worth exploring, but it's hard to say if for your organization it is something to do right now.
All right, thank you. Maybe just a small hint. We have Matthias here with us, who's gonna speak about Threads in our next lecture. So make sure that you follow us on our social media. So sorry, had to put it out. But maybe we have another question in our chat from Angela from Montenegro, who actually wants to hear your opinion if one person is enough to work on social media in an organization. So in this case, the governmental organization, because they had a strong cyber attack last year, and basically they have only one person who's in charge of social media for security reasons, and she's certain that this person cannot deal with everything. So
no, it's very challenging. It's not uncommon to have, still now, which is surprising, I think, that there are smaller government departments that have an even smaller allocation of resource towards social. And you'll come into contact with organizations that are really super wild and out there and experimental and doing all sorts of crazy things, and the trendsetters in government digital. And then there's organizations that are resistant, don't see the value, don't put any effort into it, and just let one poor person try and take on the world and deliver everything. And then it's an impossible situation, and it's not a healthy situation either, really, because it's not good for the organization, because they're not going to get any sort of real value out of social if you've just got one person. Especially, it depends if it's a very small organization, maybe one person is actually more than enough. But I'm getting the sense that maybe with this example, it's not the case. And I think that the person will get burnt out, the organization will feel that they're not getting results, so why we even bother doing it? And then the person who's doing it is thinking I'm doing the best I can with what I've got, and why am I even bothering myself? And so it's a lose-lose for everybody all around when you do things like that. And if you are in a situation where you are a one-man, one-woman team, then think about kind of cutting back on things. Find what are the essentials. If you find that you're in an organization, you're the only person there, or maybe there's one or two of you, and your organization's on every single platform going and is posting across all these platforms constantly, you cannot maintain that. And if you are maintaining it, you'll burn out, but also the content will be crap. So you're better off sitting back and thinking, well, which of these platforms, if I was to pick two, maybe three, but two, maybe three platforms that are really important and are actually valuable and we're seeing results from, stick with those. And all the other stuff, you need to kind of find a way to agree with whoever kind of has the final say that we need to cut back on this stuff if we want to be effective on social media, and start being a bit more militant in terms of kind of frequency you're posting. If you're trying to post to 2, 3, 4 platforms 5 times a week on every platform, that's however many pieces of content. It's impossible. You can't do it. So it'd be better if you're on 3 channels to have 3 or 4 posts or 2 or 3 posts per channel that are good than having 6, 7, 8 because you're posting every day and you need to be seen as being active. And also don't forget the engagement piece is that takes time, and that's equally as valuable. So yeah, it's sad to hear that there's still teams that only have one person.
Thank you. I mean, I see that we're actually approaching 5 p.m. here. So Matt, would you maybe have time for one last very quick question?
I got questions or any of the stuff that you want to ask, go for it. No problem at all.
Actually, well, I'm like very quickly, but I'm like really curious, like as you know, someone who's very deeply involved in social media trends, of course, and development. What do you think, like what emerging technologies or trends do you believe will have the most significant impact on social media marketing in the coming years? And of course, how can government and nonprofit communicators prepare for these changes that may impact their messaging efforts?
Well, I've got a fairly long list, so I'm going to try and Skype through it as quickly as I can to get as much out there for you as possible. And then if needs be, I can always send you my document. You can keep it with my notes anyway. I think the obvious one that is AI, and AI in terms of the pros and the cons. So AI from the point of view of helping with content generation, ad targeting, making it more sophisticated and more efficient, more effective. AI in terms of helping you with analytics, also things like chatbots, creating experiences for people that actually provide a level of service in some way that are actually more human-like and actually more useful and therefore would be used more. So I think AI has all sorts of potential, and we're only just starting to see the tip of the iceberg of what that will look like. But equally, there's the second side of that is that it's going to provide us with all sorts of election misinformation and deep fakes and creation of spam accounts en masse and bots and all of the other problems. So I think we're going to have a crazy year this year as more of that comes on stream, and as we have the elections taking place around the world as well. So I think that will be a dominant theme in the news, with social platforms being told they're not doing enough, regulators saying you're going to get fined, and then citizens saying this is a mess, and it'll be crazy. I think let's just bring down where the other one is as well there. Oh yeah, sorry there. I think that the private social piece I mentioned is really important one, because that's not something that's just happened this year or last year. It's been a trend that's been developing for some time. So this shift towards people spending more time engaging, posting, publishing, creating in places that are not in feeds, the move away from the feed in many ways, and so that proves to be challenging for the reasons I mentioned earlier. But I think one of the things that government communicators need to think about is creating communities and private spaces like WhatsApp and Instagram channels, or creating a Discord server or whatever may be appropriate for whatever it is you're working on, to kind of create a place for people to congregate as well. So you create some of these communities, but also be more immersed in some of this stuff. Like a community isn't just about having a group, a forum, or a chat channel. A community is like the people that are constantly engaging around a specific hashtag or topic on TikTok. Being on top of what those conversations look like, what content's being produced, and replying to people, even if it's not a post that's tagged you in it, being part of that conversation. So when you do want to show up and be part, maybe you do get permission at some point to have a TikTok account and stuff, you can show up authentically, not just something like hijack the conversation. You've never been here before and you just suddenly, why are they here? So I think thinking about what this means for you in terms of the private shift. So the shift to private social is quite important. I think regulation is going to be an interesting one as well. I think we're just starting to see, Digital Market Act, Digital Services Act in Europe, the Online Safety Bill, or whatever they've called it now. They keep changing it, and all of these things, as well as US. I think we are on the verge, but finally, of the US having bipartisan support for sort of legislation about that. And I think how that affects government communicators, well, for those that are involved in those sorts of departments dealing with the regulation, that's going to be an interesting year. But I think in terms of what the platforms will feel like, what sort of content will be permitted, what rules might be brought in, and what things will the platforms do to kind of tackle some of this stuff, or to make sure they comply, might change the dynamics of the platform, or it certainly will make it a better, safer place, hopefully. But undoubtedly there is going to be changes because of the regulation. And I think we're early on into seeing what those changes might look like. Any other quick ones I would say quickly? Is there any others? You mentioned other changes. Just scrolling down to my list for you. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Video is in a weird place because video is still very the most dominant kind of format, and the platforms that drive the most engagement and attention are YouTube, TikTok, Reels. But we're seeing this interesting shift of moving to longer form again. We've kind of gone back from short into longer form, and there's lots of reasons for that. Partly because people are wanting to push quality content, like the platforms like YouTube want people to watch more of this stuff on TV, as does TikTok. And so that shift to horizontal and then higher quality, longer videos supports that trend and that interest. And also longer videos provide the platforms with more ways to keep you hooked for longer, but also gives creators and brands more opportunities to monetize. And so although we've probably spent all the last couple of years thinking about short form video and TikToks and Reels, long form and is making not necessarily making a comeback, but it's becoming as talked about again as the short form. So I think that trend is particularly interesting. And then finally, I think one of the most interesting ones for government agencies and institutions is the issues of trust and privacy. I think that if you look at Reuters news surveys that come out every year, digital news surveys, you look at various other barometers of people's feelings about content and trust and privacy. Generations, particularly Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and millennials as well, are ever more avoidant of news, mainstream news. They're increasingly not following news brands and disengaging from some of this content, and also don't trust what they're being told, and where they're going to get this news and content now is shifting as well. It's been happening for years, but TikTok and YouTube and other social channels are becoming the dominant platforms for where much of this audience is getting their information from. And so for government agencies and departments and institutions, being present in those places, being aware of what's being put out on those channels, and the fact that being aware that this particular younger demographic is not capturing the mainstream news and is disengaging and is more skeptical and has concerns over trust and privacy. Those are quite big challenges and obstacles, not just for news organizations, but for people like Number 10 or for European Commission or whatever, who are trying to engage audiences and get their messages out there. It's getting to beyond the platform that they're on and being present in those platforms and nurturing those communities, but also trying to make sure that people listen to what you're talking about and have faith in what you're saying. And one of the things I tell organizations to do is to act and behave like a creator and create like a creator. Don't think like we're a government agency and we want to put a video on TikTok. Think of it as, I'm a creator that's creating content that needs to feel, look, and fit with, as an example, TikTok or Reels or wherever else. And if you aren't able to do that, you don't have the teams to do that or the skills or the knowledge, work with creators. That's what Biden campaign's doing. That's what Downing Street's been doing, and Home Office this week are doing stuff with Albanian TikTok influencers to push the sort of channel, people coming over the channel, refugees and things. So if you can't act and behave and deliver like a creator, then work and collaborate with creators, because they can carry your message through. So I think that those are some of the important themes.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Matt. And thank you for giving us a little bit of extra time. Just on behalf of everyone, I just want to thank you so much for the insights that you've offered. I feel that it is completely refreshing to hear someone who has had the experience both inside the public sector, outside the private sector, and is now someone who is seen as is offering sage advice to both, to be able to explore these topics with us, and in many cases to offer reassurance for many of the things that I'm sure many government communicators watching are feeling, thinking, and have been interested in exploring. So your insights, your time has been incalculably valuable to us. So thank you so much for taking the time with us today. I just want to, Matt already beat me to it, but I just want to give another shout out to Matt's Geek Out newsletter. It offers invaluable insights every Friday. It's something that I would recommend that everyone within my kind of broader European team who's here, and everyone else who's joining outside of that, should be checking out, because Matt offers so many, interesting perspectives and so much news that I think is valuable to us, that we, unfortunately, as government communicators, are often insulated from, or are unable or without the time to access ourselves. So it's been an invaluable resource to me, and I'm certain that'll be an invaluable resource to you. So
Well, I hope
thank
so.
you so much.
I just wish someone had done it when I was in government, because the reason why that newsletter exists is because I used to get to the end of the week working in government. I used to be like, I haven't got the time to figure out what the latest feature on Instagram is, what's happening with TikTok getting banned, and I just thought, if I can get every single bit of news to do with social media and put it in one place, if I went there and it's all in there, that would be a super time saver, and do it for free. That'd be amazing. So that's the genesis of it. So hopefully, if you want to keep up with all and it's all in one place, that will be useful, and it's completely free. But thank you for having me, and thank you for hosting me. I hope it was useful and interesting, and I get to work with some of your members, because I've had a great opportunity to do some stuff with various US departments and British government teams. So yeah, I always enjoy getting my hands dirty again and getting back into government work. So maybe we'll cross paths again.
I don't know. What do you think, Team EU? Are we into that? Quick comments on the side. Kathleen already said something to that effect. So yes, we will. There will be many opportunities for you to engage with EDDE, for the State Department, and we hope that this is really just the start of that. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and you know where I am if you ever want any help.
All right, thank you. And everyone, remember, Matt's at Geek Out. Go look it up. Go subscribe to it. If you are inclined to go pay for the more premium subscription to that, I promise you it would not. It's money well spent. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And we hope, as Ingrid said, that you will join us next month, where we'll be hearing from Matthias Lufkens, where he can expand on that one question we had about threads. So Camila, we expect to see you there next month. So thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.